Hello everyone, I'm Shriya,
This is Sukanya.
and we are back again with another episode of Intersectional Feminism Desi Style Season 3, brought to you by Feminism in India.
So, through the course of this podcast, as you are all aware, we have been exploring the various gender stereotypes in different professional sectors. The development sector is among the many fields where a lot of important investigations in terms of social engineering, policy pushing, social audit, and accountability initiatives happen, among other projects. But often, with women, especially who work in this sector, there is a stereotypical representation attached. The NGO woman, the geeky, always serious, somewhat rigid, and these are all images that we have seen in popular culture and narratives that are largely male and far from the truth. So, what is it like to be a woman working in the development sector in India? Let's find out today.
Absolutely, Sukanya, and we have with us a very, very special guest to discuss all of this and more. We have with us Anjali Gopalan. Anjali is an Indian human rights activist and an animal rights activist, and the founder and executive director of Naz Foundation Trust, an NGO which is dedicated to fight against the HIV/AIDS epidemic in India, mainly focusing on women and children. Anjali has also been a strong campaigner of the LGBTQ plus rights in the country and played a huge role in decriminalizing of homosexuality by the Supreme Court in the Section 377 judgment. In 2012, the Time magazine also placed Anjali in the list of 100 most influential people in the world. We are so happy and honored to have you with us, Anjali. Thank you so much for doing this.
Great to be with you guys. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Anjali. So let's just delve into this conversation. So, firstly, I'd like to ask you that as someone who has been in the development sector for so long, and someone who's been especially been working with women and children and gender minorities, what is it that made you arrive at this decision to sort of choose this career path? Could you talk to us a little bit about the process and the time about when you decided that this is what you would want to do for the rest of your life and how this journey began and how it's been going.
Well, it's. I don't think this was a very thought through thing that happened with me. I actually started out as my career as a journalist, and when I went to the US to study, part of my master's requirements was to work with a community-based organization. So I did, and the organization was working with undocumented migrant labor from Haiti and Latin America. And it was interesting because at that time, HIV, this was around about 86, 87. HIV was becoming a big issue in that community. No one remembers it so in the past, but at that time, for example, there was this whole issue of blood not being taken from Haitians because they were seen as people who are vectors of HIV. So there was a lot of discrimination, and of course, the gay community. It was known as GRID at that time in the 80s, no, gay-related immune dysfunction. It was known as a gay cancer. So hospitals wouldn't touch gay people who had HIV. It was the stigma and discrimination was unbelievable. And I remember my boss once saying, "Oh, I think you have the capacity to be a very good trainer and counselor. I think you should get trained for that." And I said, "Oh, no." I was making all these noises. And she said, "Look, why don't you go get trained? And then you decide." So she kind of arm twisted me and sent me off to the New York City Department of Health. And that's where I got trained. And I must tell you, I came back a changed person. And I decided, okay, this is what I really need to do because HIV then, just with what was happening there, it made the way I understood discrimination in our context, in our culture, it made it, it made me understand it in a very different way. So that's how I started my work. So it wasn't really something that was, planned out. And of course, at that time, every second day we were at funerals because so many people were dying, especially in the gay community. And a lot of South Asian gay men, young men, believed that this was an older white man's disease and really it doesn't impact them. So it made me even more determined. I was like, no, 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 this is something we really have to work with. And that's how the work started. And I think what HIV does is that it gets a grip on you. You Because every day it makes you think about who you are, what your attitudes are, how you're looking at it. It actually makes you look at your culture. It slaps you in the face every day and makes you understand what discrimination is in a way that I don't think anything else did in my life. So for me, that was it. And I think once you work in HIV, you're kind of, you know, you're there. And so that's how the journey started. And when I came back to India, which was in 94, and started Naz, um, because I really felt that there was such a need for it here. I had been trained in this area for so long. It was work that I could transfer, it was skills I could transfer. And that's how it happened. And I felt there was such a need for it because apart from one organization working with the LGBTQI community, there was no one. And in Northern India, no one at all. So I said, okay, this is something I can. And my gay friends were like, listen, please just get your act together and do something. And that's how it happened. And of course, you can well imagine at that time when I came back, I was very much trained in the Western way of understanding sexuality issues. And I was like, okay, you're either straight or bi or gay. Except that when I started my work here, I was like, oh my God, I have to relearn everything. Because not only were a lot of men having sex with men, they were married to women. And I was like, oh, this means this infection will definitely go from men to women to children. And therefore, if we're going to look at HIV prevention in this country, we cannot limit ourselves to just this one group. We have to look beyond. And that's how the journey started.
It's very interesting, Anjali, that you mentioned that, coming to India when you started working on HIV in India, yeah, there were a lot of things that you had to unlearn, and there were a lot of challenges that maybe people in the West might not face. Like the challenges are very different, like you said. So in that sense, there's also this thing where like that a lot of development sector people get right that you have to be very brave to be in this sector. You have to face a lot of people saying stuff or people ostracizing you and things like that. So like there's that sort of risk, that social safety risk that is constantly talked about. So in terms of that, have you ever felt particularly threatened because of your gender while doing this work?
Well, I think this kind of work anyway requires a thick skin, especially if you're going to work on issues of sexuality and it does. It's interesting, in spite, even now at this age and stage of my life, when I go to do a sexuality session with a new group of people who don't know me, it still comes into my head, what are they going to think about me? Are they going to think, what are they going to think, that, oh, if she's saying all this, God knows what all she does. That thought is always there. And of course, one has to decide, look, if you want to really prevent this infection from happening, you have to put everything on the line because it is so preventable, right? We don't want to see more women infected. I don't want to see young wives infected. I don't want to see children being born with HIV. I don't want to see young men getting a disease which is so preventable. So I'm very clear. Yes, of course there are issues, yeah, but I feel, if one is, do I feel that as a woman I was particularly targeted? I must say, over the years, I've never felt disrespected. And I speak very openly about everything and anything because I think we really need, if we want to prevent this infection, that's what we need to do. So I've never felt disrespected. Um, a lot of times, I think what holds us back is how we ourselves have look at ourselves as women, right? And frankly, at the end of the day, of course, you have to have a kind of support. I was extremely supported by my family, by my friends. And I think that's what allowed me to blossom in the way that I did and take the stands that I could. So all of that helped. I actually think it helps at one level that I'm a woman, because when I talk about these issues in the way that I do, I think as a woman I come across, especially when I'm talking to other women, it makes a lot of difference. When I'm talking to men, it makes a lot of difference because it always starts out by them being very titillated and then really listening to me. And I think they listen to me also because I'm a woman. So yes, there are times when you feel um, that maybe they're judging me in a certain way because I'm a woman. But I think overall things have not been um, that bad as I thought it would be. Frankly, given the kind of work I'm doing, I always thought being a woman would have been a lot more difficult. But now, after so many years of doing this here in India, I'm thinking maybe so often we ourselves internalize um, internalize what society wants us to believe. So if you're willing to take a stand which allows you to fight that, I think you are that much more powerful because you're a woman.
Right, Anjali. You have just spoken about how it has not been as bad as you thought it would be. But also, just to get some more insight, you have been someone who has actively been working with the government and people in power to, in your various endeavors, pushing back at whether it's the homosexuality, I mean, the decriminalization of 377, or talking about abuse that happened at government's shelters and things like that. So that there might have been a lot of back and forth and conversation with people in power, essentially authorities, administrators, police officials, etc., etc., which are these are all structurally also very masculine places of power. So have you ever felt that the pushback, in the sense, do you feel that women get taken very less seriously? Have you ever felt that, if I was a man and I was saying this, I maybe wouldn't have to have said this 5 times, maybe at the second time they would have taken me seriously? Like, do you feel that when women deal with these kind of, in policy, in negotiating with people who are in positions of power, do you feel that women tend to get taken very less seriously as compared to men? Does that ever get in the way of the work? Does that increase the time of your work? Do you feel like a lot of time is wasted in just convincing people or for people to take you seriously?
Again, I'll say that yes, there are times when you feel that suppose I was a man, I was and saying the same thing, um, they would accept it a lot faster. But it's not something that happens a lot. But I'm now speaking at this stage and age of my life, which also makes a lot of difference. The white hair helps. So so I think, but yes, there are times when you do feel that if there is a head of an institution who's male, an NGO who's male, as opposed to a woman who's heading an institution, the chances are sometimes it may happen that that as a woman you have to really establish yourself, your credentials a lot more than what the man does. It does happen. Um, but that is something I've never allowed that to stand in my way. So I think as women we also have to teach ourselves how to take this on and fight it without sounding um, like we are so aggressive that that's the only way that we can get anything across. And I remember years ago, someone once said this about Indira Gandhi, that she is the only man in the cabinet. right? But imagine someone saying that, and imagine what she must have gone through for people to say something like that about her. But that's unfortunate that women are, you know, those are the power structures are so male. In a patriarchal society, that's what it is all about, right? Everything is so male. So either you become male, and then therefore you are at least listened to, or you have to find a way to continue being who you are and being able to hold your own to take those forces on. And of course, it helps as you get older. I keep going back to that. Young women, it's so hard for young women. There's no doubt about it. It's harder for younger women for sure. So I'm glad to be an older woman right now.
Yeah, I mean, I feel you. I completely feel you in the sense when you say that it's harder for younger women. I think Sukanya would agree as well. But talking about your work and talking about Naz Foundation's work, like you've been one of the very central characters to the decriminalizing of 377 in India, and like that was one of the one of those moments that when you look back, when we are at our worst in terms of what is happening in the country, and then we look back, okay, this also happened a few years back, and it was one of those top moments that we, as a generation, will always look up to. So could you tell us a little bit about the journey that you had while being an activist fighting for the cause, and then finally getting it decriminalized? And what do you think, like, after it's been 4 years since that has happened, where do you see we are at, and where do you think we need to be, like the entire journey, and of course where what else needs to be done?
You know, when I look back now, I realized that again, this was another thing I kind of just jumped into, like I do every time for everything I do in life. Nothing is ever planned and thought through, oh, this has to be done, we must do it, and I jump into it. And I'm glad in a way now when I look back that I have that way of functioning. I still function like that, by the way. So, and then I think maybe I should have thought a little bit about this. But for for now, I have a lot of young activists, queer activists who say, why did you not talk about rights? Why did you only talk about decriminalizing? But the point is, at that time, there were two things that had happened. One is no one was willing to put their neck on the line because the environment was so negative. And I remember speaking to Ashok Rao Kavi, a dear friend, and he said, look, we'll support you, but you go ahead with this, right? Because we felt at that time also the other thing that was that there was no POXO. So 377 was used to prosecute child sexual abuse. So we couldn't ask for this to be taken off the statutes. Also, it is a law which which helps in sexual abuse of animals, which is huge in our country, but we don't talk about it. The amount animals are sexually abused is amazing, but this is something culturally we don't talk about. So 377 had its plus points too. However, it was constantly used to harass gay people. And by the way, nowhere in 377 do you talk about homosexuality. But what it does talk about is if you have carnal intercourse against the order of nature. Very Judeo Christian terms, right? So, because the courts never defined what is order of nature, what is carnal intercourse. So, actually, if we look at it, all of us who are having children not to procreate, or sorry, having sex not to procreate, are in violation of 377. So it's all everyone in this country. Except that who's going to question straight folks? So no one's going to say, why are you having oral sex and anal sex, right? Or why are you using contraception not to get pregnant? Well, that's what this law was all about. So clearly, straight folks were not going to be questioned, and it was used by the cops to harass gay people. because you're not out, you're scared. And we have one of the most corrupt police forces on this planet. So, of course, it was constantly used by them. But what really for us pushed us over the top was when I do a lot of counseling of families, and 9 out of 10, 9.5 out of 10 times, it's usually men who are brought in by their parents, young men, who the parents want me to tell them to become straight. And when they see that I'm not doing that, they will say things like, anyway, tell him to get married. What he does in his own time is his lookout, long as he has children and does the right thing. Yeah? Family name must continue. It dovetails into how we look at women's sexuality and what we think of marriage and what we think of women also. But anyway, she's supposed to be happy because she has those kids, and she's there to look after her in laws. And while he can do what he wants, and who's going to question him? So I'm like, but what about the woman? No one's thinking about her. But interestingly, they would say they would not allow the sons to come back to me because I was not asking them not to marry. And then one young man who came back, and I was very surprised to see someone who comes back. And I was like, what happened? And he said, my parents took me to, and he named a major hospital in Delhi where he had been given shock treatment to make him straight. This is all part of conversion therapy, and this is a major hospital in Delhi. So the next day itself, I marched off to the National Human Rights Commission. And they, of course, threw me out saying, sorry, this is a criminal act. We cannot accept your complaint. So I said, what are you talking about? You're the National Human Rights Commission. So they said, no, we can't do anything. Huge change. Now, the same National Human Rights Commission has a committee for the LGBTQI community, right? So at that time, they didn't accept. So then we said, okay, we need to do something about this. And luckily for us, Lawyers Collective was also looking to challenge this, and we came together. And the rest is history. Long journey. Yeah? We were in the High Court, got thrown out, went to Supreme Court, referred back to the High Court, and then in 2009, fantastic judgment, where homosexuality was decriminalized. We asked for a reading down of the law to exclude consenting adults. Please understand, consenting adults, which means if you're having sex with someone below the age of 18, it's rape. And the whole world was very happy. All of us were very happy. Many young people came out. And then suddenly we did the impossible. We had Hindu, Muslim, Christian groups come together and convince the Supreme Court that, oh, this is against our values and our religious principles and our cultural heritage and all those good things. So the Supreme Court, in its wisdom, set aside the Delhi High Court judgment. But luckily, I think what happened with the 2009 judgment was the environment had changed. So we finally had a bunch of gay people go to the courts and say, look, we exist, we are here. Please listen to us. And the courts did. And then we got the Navtej Singh judgment, and the High Court judgment was reinstated. So right now, homosexuality is no longer criminalized in our country. Hallelujah. Wonderful. So all of us should be sitting back on our haunches and feeling very thrilled. Except that you have a whole bunch of citizens of this country who are excluded. They do not have equal rights. So for those who want to get married, for those who want to adopt, those who want to do all those things, they can't. If you are in a gay relationship, you can't do it. It's a bit different for the trans community because of the trans bill, the Lancer judgment. But overall, we still haven't given. Who are we to give? But gay people still don't have equal rights. So they're no longer criminals, but they don't have rights. So now we have another long journey back again, back and forth, fighting. Who do you fight with? Do you fight with authorities? Do you fight in the courts? So I think multiple things have to start happening.
So just want to, like, since you mentioned that it's a long journey and fight keeps on. Like being in this sector, and this is something that happens a lot, especially when you're working in the development sector, working for a cause. Like the wins are smaller and they come, and you need to rejoice those wins, but also not forget that it's not over. So how do you keep motivating yourself in these, like, does it feel like, oh, we are celebrating, but there's still a long path? Like how do you also celebrate and not be disheartened that, okay, we have to do a lot more? Like, what's the mentality behind that?
If you think that, oh, this is such a huge problem, what can I do? You've lost the game. And it's that's why I think many of us who really want to do something end up not doing it, because the problem is so huge. But the way I look at it is, look, let's who even if we can touch one life, doesn't matter if it's human or animal, it doesn't matter. If we can touch that one life and make a difference in that one life, can you imagine in this country, there's no reason for people not to be able to lift themselves to the next level. If only all of us decided to follow what our heart told us was we wanted to do. But we don't allow that. We're so scared. And of course, I'm of course the other side, no, of stupidity. Like I remember when everything I've done in life, people are like, what are you doing? And I'm like, it doesn't matter. You're doing this without any money. Money will come. What is the big deal? But that's what I've always felt, and it's happened. That's how I started the care home. Can you imagine starting a institution for taking care of children without resources? But I did it because I was like, it needs to be done. And I did it. A child got left at our care home who was HIV positive. All we know, and when I went crazy trying to get him admitted in government homes and other institutions, it didn't happen. So I said, okay, let's start the care home. And people are like, there are millions of kids. What will you do? I said, listen, the few kids who come into our lives, we will take care of them for life. Yes, there are millions, but there are other ways of looking at the same issue, no? So now, though we are not taking kids, once in a while we still do, but overall we've stopped. But what we are doing is that we do a lot of training and working with other childcare institutions to start taking children living with HIV into their programs. And that's made a lot of difference. So, of course, there are ways of doing things, right? But so, going back to the fact that all of us need to stop letting this huge problem we are faced with in this country, we've got to stop allowing that to stop us from doing what all of us can do. Surely one life you can take care of. How difficult is it? Right? No matter how rich or poor you are, all of us can do it. So let's start doing that at least.
Anjali, when you speak about mm, resources and money, there's also, it's also a larger question in the sense that, like we said in the beginning of the episode, development sector is also a space where a lot of important investigations and process and policy pushing and social engineering takes place. And all of this requires resources. And the lack of resources a lot of times do, like you said, paralyze people feel like, how am I going to go ahead with this? And there's also this stereotype attached with the development sector that it does not pay enough, it's not very lucrative for young, enough, or it not, I mean, let's leave lucrative, but sometimes young professionals find it difficult to sustain themselves even when they would want to work in this industry, etc. So what are your thoughts on, I mean, do you feel like that there should be some other kind of support? What other kind of support is needed, is, what other interventions do you feel are needed to make this sector as a workplace more viable, both for the people who work in it as well as for the projects that are taken on?
Well, I think all of this is so donor dependent, right? It's how are you going to convince donors? And I think that is changing, by the way. I think today at least in larger cities, this may not be true so much for in rural areas and smaller towns and cities, but I think NGOs today are paying competitive salaries. I think so. Um so that attitude is changing even among donors. Um, but clearly, it's not happening at the pace that we'd like to see happen. And I'm not sure all donors are buying into this, right? Um, Also, there are a lot of government strictures on this. Today, FCRA, where you get foreign donations from, you're not allowed to spend more than 20% on admin. So, therefore, you know, it's not easy. So I feel there have been a lot of reforms uh, in the in our sector. Do I think we need more of it to happen to attract young people to come in and stay on? Yes, I think so. We also have another additional problem is that we have to compete with the donor world, with international NGOs. So it's a constant battle. And yes, it's hard. Um, but I still see a lot of people who are very committed and take on this life and this work and continue with it. I'm seeing a lot of that also, which I think is the beauty of our country, by the way. The one thing COVID did, it made us very aware of, of the level of poverty. We all know it, but I think COVID allowed us to see it. And it also made us understand what should be important for us. So I'm very hopeful. I'm very hopeful that we will still be able to attract a lot of young minds who are committed, because a lot of them exist. So and that's the beauty of this country also. I think we manage to do what we do because at some level there are enough of us who are willing to do it, right? So even though there are days when one feels really hopeless, I always tell myself about this. I always go back to, and for me now, COVID is the time when you know, how all of us scrambled to make sure that people got food. All of us were doing it. And there were people, my God, standing on street corners and cooking and feeding people. So it's not that our government did anything great. It should have been them doing it, right? But they were not doing it. I don't care what they say. It was people who were just taking care of everybody. So that makes me feel very good about us as a people. There is hope.
It's very interesting that you say, Anjali, that there is hope, and I agree. Like there are too many of us. Like if there's like a 5% of the people who are not willing to do it, there'll be 15% or 20% who are willing to take up the job. And I guess like being empathetic and being passionate about what you do is a big part of that. Like in conclusion, like I would want to ask you, Anjali, what is your, like you said it, we already addressed it, but like if you had to give this one message to the younger generation who are, you know, joining the development sector, or are freshers in the sector, how do you deal with the challenges and anxieties of the job? Because this is a challenging job. It's not your usual 9 to 5 where you come, log in, do the work, and go away. There are a lot of challenges, a lot of anxieties. How do they deal with that and continue in the path to make the change that they want to? What would be your message?
Well, I think it'll be twofold. One is, of course, I go back to don't let the big picture paralyze you. But the second, and this I would also address to heads of institutions and people in positions of authority. Young people need to be mentored. We have to create an environment where they feel secure and where they are allowed to spread their wings. And I would tell young people that follow your convictions. Because in the long run, if I look at my own life, I think what gives me such, because we do what we do because we get so much back in return. I remember someone once telling me, "Oh, you're like Mother Teresa." I'm like, no, of course I'm not. And stop making me so boring. But you know what it is? It is Mother Teresa did what she did because of her equation with her God. All of us need to do what we do. We do what we do because we get so much more joy back. Always remember that. When you give, 100-fold comes back to you. So don't ever get disheartened and feel there's no point. Because that's what it's all about, right? If you've started your journey on this path, you are a different kind of person. You think differently, you feel differently, and you express differently. So allow that to happen. Allow yourself to blossom into that. And you'll be such, I think it's a very joyous life after that. With lots of ups and downs. I'm not, I am not romanticizing it, but I know one thing that I have got so much in return. The love. Because I really think it's all about love. I really think it's all about love. And the love, the caring, um, my work with animals, the understanding death and dying in a different way, understanding how to forgive. When I look at the cruelty we as human beings eke out to animals and the fact that they can forgive us and trust us again, I think it's taught me how to forgive, and truly trust. So this whole life is all about that journey, and we must allow ourselves. Um, we must be kind to ourselves to understand that and let it happen too. Absolutely, it's so easy to become disheartened. Please don't allow that to happen to you.
Right. We've come to the end of this conversation, and I think I will remember this for a long time, and I'm sure our listeners will also remember to not be paralyzed by the larger picture, to follow your conviction, and to be kind to yourself, and to believe that with all its strife and with all its tribulations, it's rewarding to truly sort of give out that empathy and learn from people and really build a community and work in that space. And that exactly is the spirit of working in the development sector. Thank you so much, Anjali. This conversation has been so lovely, it's been so insightful, and also it's been so human on so many different levels. And with your expertise and your experience in life, we're very honored that we could have this conversation. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much and take care, both of you.
Thank you so much, Anjali. That's all, everyone. We'll be back with yet another episode of Intersectional Feminism Desi Style Season 3. Stay tuned and stay safe.